Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chiavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5Times Sportsbook. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Friday's Ultimate Fighter 22 finale event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Now, this podcast is going to be a bit more streamlined than normal because the UFC is holding 3 events in 3 days, and they just announced the fight card for this past evening. They even have UFC Fight Night 80 taking place later tonight. So hopefully you don't mind if we go through some fights a little bit quicker than usual. Now, the Ultimate Fighter 22 finale features a 10-fight card in total and will be aired on Fox Sports 1 this Friday night. Let's dive right in. Now, we're just going to start from the bottom up. The bout order is still to be determined, but we're going to kick it off with the 3 fights featuring fighters from the Ultimate Fighter Season 22, and that begins with a lightweight battle between Chris Gritzmacher, who is 12-1, and Abner Laveris, who is 19-7-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Gritzmacher minus 230, the comeback on Laveris plus 170. Right now, looking over 5 dimes, it's minus 190 for Gritzmacher. The comeback on Laveris is plus 150. So a little bit of love coming in on the dog here. I can actually understand it. I think it's going to be a very competitive fight, and he's actually stylistically a pretty tough matchup for Gritzmacher. I mean, he's starting off with Laveris first. He's a savvy vet, been around the sport for a long time, so his resume outside of the UFC is actually pretty solid. He's, again, well-rounded fighter, decent fight IQ, mixes things up well on the feet, technical skill set everywhere the fight takes place, whether it's underground or standing. And he looks for takedowns as well. So this guy is not an easy out. He's capable of outpointing people. He's capable of finishing people as well. He's got a little bit of power to go along with some submission skill. So he's definitely a tough out. And Gritzmacher is more well-known for his power. I mean, the guy is kind of going to be on the shorter side here, of course, but he's physically strong. He's got one of those compact builds and, man, a very powerful frame. He trains at a good camp with MMA Lab. He has very decent wins outside of the UFC as well. I mean, he beat UFC vet John Gunderson, Rolly Delgado. So those are pretty impressive wins. And he's really picked up a lot of momentum. And I'm not even surprised that he, made the UFC roster here because the guy is definitely talented and he can pull off some wins. So he's going to look to take Laveris down in this fight. He's going to look to grind him out. He's going to look to do some damage. I mean, Gritzmacher hits you. You could definitely feel it. I mean, the guy has devastating knees in the clinch as well. A lot of power, and he's basically one of those guys that he gets you on the floor. He starts unloading. He's got that killer instinct, and it's kind of hard to get from out underneath him and then just kind of neutralize him a little bit. But I do think if anybody can do it, it is Laveris. I mean, he's been around the sport for so long. He's faced pretty much everything there is to face. So I think Gritzmacher's power isn't going to reflect how this fight turns out. I think Laveris is going to probably keep the fight upright for the most part, and he's going to be able to pick Gritzmacher apart. As the fight goes on, especially, I'm expecting Gritzmacher probably to come out early and maybe almost dominate round 1, but if Laveris can hang in there, which I think he will, I think he wins round 2 and round 3, pulls off either a close decision or maybe even gets a possible stoppage. So I am leaning with the dog Laveris here in this fight. I think it is going to be a very competitive fight, but that's the way I'm going to go.
When you mentioned that Laveris has been around for a while, and there's a reason, he's 33 years old. That's not a great age to be making your UFC debut, especially in the lighter weight classes. Gritzmacher, he's a little bit younger at 29, and what I really like about Gritzmacher is the fact that he has good fight IQ. He knows how to use his own physical tools and technical skills to win fights, and he is a grinder at its heart. I mean, the guy pushes people into the fence, he gets takedowns, he beats you up on the ground, he wins decisions, he maybe wins a little bit of by TKO, maybe a submission if he can wear his opponent down, but for the most part, that's just how he goes. And I do think that Gritzmacher, if he wins this fight and continues in the UFC, he will be dropping down to the featherweight division. That's where he's primarily competed throughout his career. Now, Laveris, he is probably a little bit more well-rounded than Gritzmacher. He's going to be a lot bigger physically, and he's going to be a lot longer especially. So that's going to help him in open space. Laveris will definitely have the advantage there. Laveris has a very impressive amateur boxing and kickboxing background, so I do think that he'll be a lot lighter on his feet. He'll be peppering away, maybe scoring some points. He could potentially hurt Gritsmacher on the feet. And then when this fight goes to the ground, Laveris is a decent submission guy too, although I don't think his wrestling is up to par, and I think that's what the deciding factor of this fight is going to be. It's going to be whether or not Gritsmacher can push Laveris into the fence, get him on his back repeatedly, and take Laveris' strengths away, which will be his boxing, his kickboxing, and maybe even getting a little space for submissions. But I don't think Gritsmacher gets submitted here. He trains with some really good grapplers at the MMA lab, and I think that he walks away with a decision. So I'm going to side with Gritsmacher. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, another TUF 22 finale fight. We have Julian Erosa, who is 14-2, taking on Marcin Rozek, who is 10-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Erosa minus 135, the comeback on Rozek minus 105, and right now looking over 5 times, it's Erosa minus 145, the comeback on Rozek is plus 105. So a little bit more action coming in on the favorite. This should be another competitive battle. I mean, these guys are both good. Again, outside of the UFC, I think the resumes aren't that bad at all. I mean, Rozek's actually a Cage Warriors vet. He has some pretty quality wins. He actually has a win over current UFC fighter Arnold Allen, which is pretty impressive because Allen is a stud, an up-and-coming prospect for sure. So that tells you something about Rozek. I mean, the guy is a well-rounded fighter again. He can stand and trade. He can take the fight to the floor. He has a little bit of everything, and I like his toughness. I like his mental aspect of things as well. And again, he's kind of proven himself with quality competition outside of the UFC with Cage Warriors and the European fighters that he has faced. There's been pretty solid competition for sure. So everything about his game, I like it. He's only getting better and better too. So I think we're going to see a lot of good things from Rozek here as we move forward in his career. He is a shorter fighter. That's one thing that kind of hurts him at times because he's outsized, and he was even on the show, but that still didn't matter. I mean, he made it pretty far, and I think he did pretty well outside of his semifinal loss, but he does have some toughness and he does have skill to win fights, especially a fight like Erosa. Erosa's another talented guy. He's a little bit longer, rangy type of fighter. He moves okay on the feet. Really, his striking defense bothers me out of anything with Erosa because he's the type of guy that is pretty tall for the weight class, obviously, as I just mentioned. So he has a little bit of difficulty actually with his defense on the feet. So you're able to get through and crack him a little bit more often than he'd like to be hit, obviously. So other than that, offensively, he's okay. His boxing is pretty solid. His kicking game's impressive as well. He likes to throw front kicks to the body, and they work pretty well for him. And he mixes things up well, and he's got decent fight IQ as well. It just, with Erosa, again, I think it's the fact that he doesn't stay active at times. He just Conor McGregor was actually saying it on The Ultimate Fighter. He likes to throw single shots on the feet a little bit. And it is true. I mean, he just sits there and, instead of throwing a lot of combinations at times, he likes to just kind of throw one punch at a time and utilize his jab a little bit. But when he does put combos together, he can be effective. Erosa, I think he's got a bright future as well. He's only 26 years old. So he's got good cardio. I think he can push a very high pace at times, depending on the opponent as well. So this is going to be a classic battle. I think that what we're going to see here is Rozek just be a little bit more aggressive. I think Rozek is going to land with his boxing a little bit harder, and I think we're going to see Erosa on his back foot a little bit, and it's going to sway to the judges, and Rosek's going to actually be able to put off a pretty close decision. If not, if anybody gets knocked out in this fight, I think it's Rozek knocking out Erosa because of that lack of defense on the feet that I was just mentioning, and Rozek has a little bit of power to go along with it here. So, but I am going to lean with the slight underdog Rozek here. I think he's going to probably be able to do enough to just barely grind out a decision win, or even possibly get a finish.
Even though Erosa made it to the semifinals, it wasn't exactly the most impressive of performances. I mean, the guy won 3 close decisions to get there, one of them majority, one by split, and I even got called out for some of his ugly wins. And current finalist, who we'll be talking about in a minute, Artem Lobov, even said that he wanted to fight him because he felt he'd been gifted his way to the semifinals, and then he knocks him out in the first round. So I do think that Erosa is flawed. He's going to have some big physical advantages in this fight in reach and height, but I think Rozek makes up for it with technical advantages in striking. I think Rozek is a little bit better in terms of wrestling and submissions. And if this fight does go to the ground, Rozek will be pretty dangerous, I believe. I just feel that Erosa, as Nick mentioned, is very poor defensively. So what you're going to see here is maybe Erosa going for that one-and-done striking style, trying to land a kick here and there, being inactive. And I think Rosek just outworks him on the feet, potentially outlands him with some big shots, and could knock him out. And then I think Rosek can control this fight on the ground as well. So I just don't quite think that Erosa is a UFC caliber, although we'll see if he's been able to improve a little bit since the show. And I expect Rosek to walk away with either a decision or maybe even a knockout. So my pick is going to be Rosek. Now moving on to the finals of The Ultimate Fighter 22. This is a little different because it's Artem Lobov who made it to the finals, and he's going to be facing Ryan Hall, who is stepping in for Saul Rogers, who had visa issues. So it's going to be Artem Lobov, who is 11-10, taking on Ryan Hall, who is 4-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
First off, let me say it's a shame that Sal Rogers wasn't able to fight, because he would have been the favorite, honestly, in this fight as well. I mean, the guy has a bright future ahead of him, so hopefully he gets himself straightened out with his visa issues and we get to see him in the UFC soon, because I think the guy can definitely win some fights. But these two are definitely going to have a battle here as well. They're both talented fighters. Lobov is one of these guys, if you look at his resume, if you just look at his win-loss record, you're thinking to yourself, man, this guy's not good at all. He's about a 500 fighter, but you have to look beyond that. I mean, he trains with guys like SBG, like Conor McGregor and the crew at SBG over there in Ireland. So, he's got a good training camp around him, environment around him. And the guy consistently gets better. And what I was talking about earlier with Rosek fighting in Cage Warriors and getting some good experience, quality experience outside of the UFC. Well, Lobov has that as well. He's got a lot of quality wins outside of the UFC. And the funny thing is, I mean, he's hitting his groove at times right now. Now, he has lost some decisions here and there, including to one UFC vet, Andre Winter, but he's typically competitive in all those fights, even the close fights, decisions that he's lost. But outside of that, Lobov, he's highlighted by his power. I mean, the guy comes forward, the guy hits for the lightweight division. Really, he hits like a truck. I mean, the guy has a tremendous amount of knockout power, and he doesn't hesitate. He's not afraid to come forward, keeps his hands really low, almost baits you to come in so he could drop a bomb on you. And he does it. I mean, he has a ton of knockouts. He knocked everybody out on the show. And he's going to look to do that for Hall as well here in this matchup, because Hall is basically your grappler and Lobov is basically your striker. So you have a classic striker versus grappler matchup. And I'll get into Hall right now as well. Hall is actually pretty impressive because for being a grappler, he actually has some technical skill on the feet as well. So I like Hall's game. I think he has a bright future ahead of him as well. I think he's going to consistently continue to improve. He's training at TriStar now as well, which should help his game. And then on the ground, the guy is just sick. I mean, he's a kind of a BJJ specialist, obviously. He loves his leg locks, his heel hook submissions. Very slick on the ground. But the problem with Hall is he has trouble getting the fight to the floor. He doesn't have great wrestling, so he has to rely on pulling guard, or he has a little bit of a sneaky good entry attack on the ground, but it's not really, it's very unorthodox, put it that way, the way he kind of dives in and goes after your legs to get the fight to the floor. So he's going to have to use that kind of method against Lobov. He's not going to be able to just get takedowns on Lobov. Lobov is probably actually the better wrestler here in this spot. But once on the ground, Hall is just, I mean, he's always chaining submissions together, and he's always trapping your legs. It's just hard to breathe with him. One of those kind of stifling grapplers that is so smooth and technical that you get in all sorts of trouble with him. Hall had some quality wins on the show for sure. He had a very close loss to Rogers, who we were just mentioning couldn't make it here. So that's why the UFC's kind of, putting him in this spot as well, because he only lost by majority decision, even though it shouldn't really have been a majority decision in my opinion. But that being said, Hall's definitely a good fighter, and he deserves to be in the spot. And this is going to be a very competitive fight, because it could possibly end Hall via submission, or it can end Lobov via TKO KO. So I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Lobov, because I think what I'm looking at here is how is Hall going to take this fight to the floor. If Lobov does follow Rogers' strategy, he's the guy that obviously beat Hall in his last fight. He was able to sprawl and brawl, keep the fight upright. He didn't play the ground game with him, and he was able to do some damage. So I think Lobov is going to be able to do the same type of thing and probably, stifle those takedowns, stay away from the ground, and do some serious damage on the feet. So striker versus grappler, I think the striker's takedown defense is good enough to win him the fight, so I'm going to go with Lobov.
Yeah, I've been following Ryan Hall's career for a long time now, not just in mixed martial arts, but in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's like the master of the 50-50 guard, where it's all about just wrapping up your legs, grapevining them with your opponent, and then he's extremely competent with heel hooks. And you saw that on the show. The first 2 opponents he faced, he finished them by heel hook in the first round. Now, the problem is, if he isn't able to get the fight to the ground, I do think he's going to be in big trouble. And he's not a great wrestler, as Nick mentioned. He kind of pulls guard, he'll drop to his back, and then try to wrap his legs around his opponent's legs, go for that 50-50 position. So if Lobov is able to avoid that situation, he's going to be in pretty good shape. Hall is going to be a little bit bigger physically than Lobov, but he's not able to use those physical advantages on the feet very well. He's really not a great striker. He's not a threat on the feet. Maybe he can score a couple points, but he's not going to knock out Lobov. And really, entirely what this fight is going to boil down to is whether or not Hall can get this fight to the floor and then get some of that grappling magic going, because Lobov is the type of guy that's not just going to submit even if he gets caught in something. He needs to be technically submitted. He needs to be put out, or he needs to get something snapped. His 2 submission losses in his career, he actually got put out cold. He went to sleep in the rear naked choke. So Hall is going to have to go for something and then just keep going at it until the fight's over. And if Lobov's able to avoid that situation, then he's probably going to either score a knockout or win a decision. I just don't see Hall doing enough to win rounds here. He really just needs to finish the fight. So I expect this fight to be entertaining, although the big concern and fear is that Hall just flops to his back a lot like old school Fabricio Verdum in fights. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But I'm going to side with Lobov. I think he has more ways to win, and as long as he avoids these situations, especially training at SBG alongside Conor McGregor, I think he'll be fully prepared for what Ryan Hall is bringing to the table, especially because they actually trained together a little bit before this fight. So I'm going to go with Artem Lobov, but not crazy confident because there is always that threat of the submission with Ryan Hall. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Joby Sanchez, who is 7-1, taking on Gene Herrera, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened this fight -130 Herrera, -110 for Sanchez, and the line got flipped, but it currently flipped back. So right now, looking at the line over at 5 dimes, we currently have Herrera coming in at -110 and Sanchez -110. So actually, at the time of the recording, it's exactly a pick'em right now, right down the middle with a 20-cent line margin. So this should be a pretty competitive fight. I know that Herrera lost his UFC debut to Ray Borg, but that's a very difficult UFC debut to make. In my opinion, Borg is one of the top 125ers out there for sure. His grappling game, his submission game, just the way he goes about things, it's a very tough out. But Herrera was game enough to survive the takedown attempts. I mean, he did spend too much time on his back. That's why he lost the fight, obviously. And he did get himself caught in some tight submissions, but he hung in there. He didn't get tapped, which is actually a win in some ways as well. But that being said, I'm expecting something better for her because he is a stud. He's only 24 years old. He's definitely a solid prospect. He has ability on the feet. He's got more ability on the ground as well. So everywhere the fight takes place, Herrera is very game. And he's not just your usual well-rounded fighter. I think he has some really special potential. I mean, he's a type of fighter that with time, I think can get himself in the upper tier of the 125 division and possibly a title run at some point. So this is another short notice fight for him, but I don't think it's going to be as tough as fighting Ray Borg. Now, I give a lot of respect to Sanchez. He's definitely proved that he belongs in the UFC 125 division, no doubt about that. But at the same time, I think Sanchez is going to need to keep this fight upright. He's going to need to stand and bang a little bit with Herrera. He's not going to want to mix around or mess around on the ground with Herrera at all. I think it will be competitive on the feet, and I think on the ground, Herrera is going to have a bigger edge for sure. So I lean Herrera. I think Herrera can win on the cards here, despite the short notice. I mean, I think his cardio is going to be good enough that it won't really come into play here. And I think he can be competitive enough on the feet, or like I said, he can utilize his ground game, and then he should have a bigger advantage there. I know Sanchez didn't get submitted by a guy like Wilson Hayes, but Herrera's a little bit different. I mean, I think that you got to kind of throw that out the window. Just because Hayes didn't submit him doesn't mean Herrera won't along the way, because he's just a different type of fighter. So I'm expecting this fight to be a very competitive, fun fight. Sanchez coming from a good camp, he's going to be well prepared, but I don't think it's going to be enough to stop Herrera. I think Herrera is going to get the victory. He's going to find a way to either finish this fight or again win a very competitive decision on the scorecard. So my lean is Herrera.
Sanchez does train out of a good gym at Greg Jackson's, but again, this is a situation where I feel that he's a bit limited overall in his skills, And there's only so much that Jackson and Winklejohn can really help you with. And I think that they won't be able to properly prepare him for Gene Herrera. Herrera is a competent grappler, a big, dangerous submission threat, and he's a decent striker. And Sanchez is definitely the type of fighter that wants to brawl, wants to stand and bang, and he does have some power. He has some decent head kicks. He's got some good punching power. And what's going to happen here is I think they're going to trade a little bit on the feet. Herrera's probably going to hold his own there, but then the second Sanchez lets his guard down or goes for something crazy, Herrera's going to get this fight to the floor. Herrera is by far the better grappler of the two. He's the bigger submission threat. He's the better wrestler. And I think if he takes Sanchez down, he can keep him down. So I am a bit concerned about Sanchez's defense in that department. You saw in his UFC debut where Sanchez was put down repeatedly by Wilson Hayes. Now, he did almost finish that fight with a big kick, but he wasn't able to do it, and then he ended up losing the decision. So you got to at least favor Herrera here as long as he sticks to that tried and true game plan that Wilson Hayes has already presented. Sanchez also was very hittable in his last fight against Matsuda. The only issue I have with Herrera here is the fact that he's taken the fight on short notice for Justin Scoggins, but I still think that he is good enough. I mean, you saw in his UFC debut against Ray Borg on short notice that he kind of held his own against Borg, and Borg is one of the best flyweights on the entire roster. And if he can even have a relatively even and exciting grappling match against Ray Borg on short notice, then I think that he can roll Joby Sanchez, especially if he can drag this fight to the floor. So I'm going to side with Gene Herrera here, so he's my pick. Now moving all the way up to the heavyweight division, we have Gabriel Gonzaga, who is 16-10, taking on Konstantin Irokin, who is 9-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Gonzaga minus 130, Irokin minus 110. Right now, looking over 5 dimes, it is currently Irokin minus 115, Gonzaga minus 105. Honestly, I'm not that surprised with the line movement. It did skyrocket up for Gonzaga a little bit early on, but I was expecting some dog action to come back in at some point, and Irokin possibly settling at a pick 'em or Irokin a slight favorite here. Because what you get, I understand Gonzaga is the much better fighter. He is the much better fighter in all aspects of the game. I think Gonzaga is actually the better striker, the better grappler, obviously, the better wrestler in this part. I mean, he just has the experience level. He's just a class above Irokin. But here's the thing. Irokin has a ton of knockout power. His boxing is pretty good. He's got enough speed to make things interesting as well. And early on, I think he can really cause Gonzaga a lot of problems. And I think he probably clips Gonzaga along the way and knocks him out. I mean, that's how Irokin wins his fights. The guy has won all but one of his fights by KO. He's got a tremendous amount of knockout power, and Gonzaga, as we all know, has been knocked out quite a bit in his career. I believe it's 8 times. So you have a guy that is, all he does is win fights by knockout against a guy that when he loses, for the most part, it's by knockout. So that's why I do think this matchup is pretty good for Irokin here in this spot, even though he's not the better fighter. The way the UFC matched this as well, I don't know if there's really too much upside for Gonzaga in this spot. I think they could, get Irokin a win here, a quality win over a vet like Gonzaga, maybe get him some confidence, maybe hopefully Irokin can address some of his cardio issues that he had in his UFC debut. But he did show signs of, some pretty good, devastating striking even in his debut. So Irokin is one of those fighters, heavy hitter. He can knock most out in the heavyweight division. And as long as he doesn't do anything stupid early on and get put on his back really early, I think he's going to be able to fend off some early takedown attempts from Gonzaga and probably knock Gonzaga out. So if that doesn't happen, I wouldn't be shocked at all if Gonzaga ends up clipping him along the way or even submitting him, obviously, as well. But I am leaning towards Irokin. I think he's going to know what to expect early on, and I think he's going to probably knock Gonzaga out.
Obviously, Gabriel Gonzaga is way more experienced. He's way better on the ground. And even though he doesn't normally have very good conditioning, he's probably the better conditioned fighter out of the two. Irokin had a very tough fight in his UFC debut against somebody that's probably not even half as good as Gonzaga and Victor Pesta, and ended up losing a decision. So it's going to be, it's almost crazy to think that Irokin even has a chance here, but it's because of Irokin's strength, which is the stand-up. He hits extremely hard. He throws everything he's got into every strike. And if even one of those connects on Gabriel Gonzaga even semi-cleanly, the fight's going to be over. Because Gabriel Gonzaga just has an awful chin. He gets knocked out in almost every one of his losses. So that's really what this fight boils down to is, can Irokin land that knockout punch early? And if he can, he wins. If he doesn't, Gonzaga wins. I mean, Gonzaga will probably be able to hold his own a little bit on the feet, but I mean, if he has any fight IQ whatsoever, he is shooting in for a clincher takedown immediately, because on the ground he should have a huge advantage. Gonzaga's a world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. He should be able to pick up a submission or at least ride out from top position long enough for Irokin to tire out. And then you could either finish him with ground strikes, a submission, or just win a decision. So it's just all about, is Gonzaga going to stand and bang with Irokin? Because if he does, I think he gets himself in some serious, serious trouble. But there's just a part of me that thinks that he's not that dumb. So I have to side with Gabriel Gonzaga here. I mean, he is so much more technically superior to Irokin in every aspect of MMA except pure stand-up ability. So I have to side with Gonzaga, and I'm just hoping and praying that he makes some intelligent decisions in this fight. So Gabriel Gonzaga is my pick. Now, dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Tetsuya Kawajiri, who is 34-8-2, taking on Jason Knight, who is 16-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Kawajiri, minus 265. The comeback on Knight, plus 185. Right now, looking over for 5 dimes. Line margins tightened up a little bit. It's minus 240 for Kawajiri. The comeback on Knight is plus 220. Interesting fight. I mean, Knight's obviously stepping in on short notice for Bektic. So Kawajiri is kind of catching a little bit of a break here, I would say, at this point of his career. Bektic has been outstanding, and not that Kawajiri's a slouch at all. I mean, he deserves to be in the spotlight. He's been in the game for a long time, and he's a very, very well put together fighter. He's got a pretty complete game, especially these days. But it is highlighted with his wrestling game, I think. I mean, back in the day, you could say that Kawajiri's stand-up was one of his biggest threats. But right now, I mean, as the years progressed, I think his wrestling and his submission game overall, he's become more of a grinding type of fighter. And that's what he's going to probably look to do against Knight here. But the problem with Knight is it's a dangerous thing because Knight is primarily a grappler. He's a well-rounded fighter as well. But the thing with him is he's got one of those crazy guard games that he plays rubber guard quite often, and he's very successful at it as well. So he's long for the weight class. He's going to have some reach over Kawajiri. And he's the type of guy that, I mean, even in his last fight, against a very highly touted Russian prospect. Knight was getting beat on the feet a little bit. He got taken down, but he gave the Russian some serious fits on the floor, and eventually he ended up catching a sub and pulled off an upset win in that spot as well. So Knight is one of these guys that he just doesn't have your typical ground game. I mean, as soon as you put him on his back, the guy starts looking and using rubber guard, and you can't do much with him. He's very stifling in that aspect. Kawajiri's a very savvy vet, so he's going to be able, I think, to probably fend off most of the submission attempts, but along the way, it's going to get interesting. It's going to get tough. And I think Kawajiri's maybe not going to want to play around on the ground. Now, Knight on the feet, as I mentioned, he's not too bad. He's got a little bit of power. He's got some skill. He mixes things up well, but he does get hit a little bit. So it will be competitive on the feet. I just don't trust Kawajiri's chin, though, that much either. So at this point of his career, I mean, he's getting up there in age. I believe he's 37 years old. So his chin's not going to get any better. And I think Knight could possibly catch him on the feet, but this is Kawajiri's fight to win or lose. He should be able to get some takedowns when he needs to, should be able to play it safe enough that he doesn't get caught here in this fight. And if it hits the scorecards, he should win because he is going to probably have a little bit better stand-up game too. So I understand the matchup, and Kawajiri is my lean, but if you guys are betting this fight, be very careful laying juice on Kawajiri in this spot, because I wouldn't be surprised at all if Knight pulls off a submission victory or even a stoppage, possibly on the feet, but more likely a sub if he does win. If he hits the scorecards, it should be Kawajiri's fight to win or lose. So that's the way I'm going to go. I'm going to slightly lean towards Kawajiri, but approach this fight with caution.
Yeah, Jason Knight is actually a really talented submission threat. He's a good fighter making his UFC debut. The problem is, of course, that it's a bit short notice, and even worse for him is Kawajiri is a very competent grappler in his own right. So he's playing right into Kawajiri's strength, and the fact that Knight is comfortable off of his back is even worse because Kawajiri will probably be looking for the takedown. He's probably going to be getting top position, and I don't see Kawajiri getting submitted easily here. So I think Knight is going to expend a lot of energy trying to get sweeps, trying to get reversals, trying to get submissions, and if he runs out of steam, he's going to be in big, big trouble against Kawajiri. Now, On the feet, Knight is a competent striker, and he is going to have a decent size advantage here in terms of height and reach, but Kawajiri should be the more technical striker. Kawajiri is just so much more experienced. He's been in there against some of the best fighters in the world at featherweight and at lightweight. So I expect Kawajiri to hold his own on the feet and probably even get the better of Knight. And especially as this fight wears on, due to the short notice of Jason Knight's performance, or due to the short notice of Jason Knight making his UFC debut, I think he's going to get a little bit tired here as this fight goes on. And I really feel like unless Knight picks up a submission early, then Kawajiri is either going to win a decision or maybe even pick up a late stoppage. Kawajiri definitely still has some left in the tank. You saw that with that recent victory over Dennis Seaver this past summer. So I expect Kawajiri to do his thing, grind this out potentially, and just screw around a little bit in Knight's guard and try to avoid submissions. So it'll be a nice little mini game to watch during this fight. But I expect Kawajiri to get the upper hand here and pick up the win. So my pick is Tetsuya Kawajiri. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Ryan LaFleur, who is 11-1, taking on Mike Pierce, who is 17-6. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened LaFleur minus 130, the comeback on Pierce minus 110. Obviously, a lot of people did not agree with that line because right now it's sitting at LaFleur minus 235. Well, actually, I should use reduced juice. It's minus 225. The comeback is plus 205 at 5 dimes right now with reduced juice setting available currently for the Ultimate Fighter lines. So that being said, obviously a lot of action coming in LaFleur's way. We all know that Pierce has been out, since his heel hook loss to Paul Harris, and that was back in October 2013. So he's had a long time off. A lot of people are thinking he's probably going to have some rust to go along with it. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure we are going to see something like that. But if this was definitely a couple years back where Pierce was in his groove and he was pulling off some impressive victories actually and facing some very good competition. You could argue his fights against Koscheck and Hendricks could have went his way. So, and those guys we know, obviously Koscheck is a bit on the decline right now. He's not even on the UFC roster anymore, but Hendricks is right there as far as the title picture goes. And Pierce was very competitive with them. So that's the kind of caliber fighter you're getting in Pierce. Now, LaFleur is going to have some physical advantages in this fight. He's going to be the much taller fighter. So he's going to be physically bigger. But as far as strength goes, Pierce is a beast. So that should probably be pretty close. Both these guys are relatively strong. Now on the feet, I think LaFleur mixes things up better. He has a more versatile attack. He mixes in kicks a lot better as well, where Pierce's boxing is probably his best attribute on the feet, where LaFleur can just mix everything in and perform a little bit better. So I expect that LaFleur to maybe have somewhat of a striking edge on the feet with his length, with his reach, with the diversity in his attack. But Pierce is going to be the one that kind of threatens a little bit more with the knockout potential. My only hesitation in this fight, honestly, is the time off. He's been out that long. I'm just not extremely confident in Pierce's ability to get the job done in this matchup right now, but I don't necessarily agree with the current line either. I do think at the current price, it is a dog or pass situation here. As far as the pick goes, I am going to slightly lean towards LaFleur though, because of all the circumstances surrounding this fight. I think LaFleur might have a small edge right now, but the way everybody's kind of almost banking on LaFleur pulling off this win, it kind of scares me a little bit, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if Pierce does show up and he resembles that fighter that we saw a couple years ago that was kind of towards the top of the food chain there and it pulls off the victory. So I am picking LaFleur, but it's honestly not a confident pick, especially according to the lines right now.
I love this matchup. It's a great battle pitting two really solid grapplers against each other. Ryan LaFleur has an excellent wrestling background, and he is the superior athlete with a bigger size advantage compared to Mike Pierce. But do not sleep on Pierce. He's been out for 2 years after suffering that knee injury and ankle injury to Rousimar Palhares in the fight that actually got Palhares kicked out of the UFC for holding on to a submission too long. But Pierce is back. He's healthy. He's ready to go. And he has a style that I think could give LaFleur trouble. Now, on the feet, Pierce is the more powerful striker, but LaFleur is quicker. He's more active. He throws with a little bit higher volume. And LaFleur will definitely have a size and reach advantage. So if LaFleur is able to stick around on the outside and pepper Pierce a little bit, he could score some points. Although I think what Pierce is going to be doing is he's going to be constantly pushing forward and looking to land that big shot on the feet or trying to get this fight to the clinch or to the ground. Now, as good of a grappler as LaFleur is, as good of a wrestler as he does have issues getting taken down and getting put on his back. You've seen that in several of his fights, especially his most recent one against Damian Maia, where he got taken down for 4 straight rounds and dominated on the ground. Although to his credit, he did not get submitted, and then he ended up weathering the storm and winning the 5th round when Maia was too exhausted to get a takedown. But this fight is 3 rounds, and the fact that I don't think Mike Pierce is going to get tired is big, because if Pierce is able to get takedowns, he's probably going to stay in top position. Or if Pierce can just push this fight into the fence, I think he can just outmuscle LaFleur a little bit. Now, both of these guys are a little older, although LaFleur has a little bit less wear and tear. The other issue, though, is LaFleur does not have quite as good of a chin as Pierce. So if Pierce is connecting with some heavy shots, I don't know if LaFleur is going to be able to take them. So really interesting matchup. It'll all really depend on if Mike Pierce comes out extremely rusty or not, how much he has left in the tank, because he was a guy that was a fringe top 15 fighter right when he got hurt, and we haven't seen him in over 2 years. So if he comes back and picks up right where he left off, I think he's going to give Ryan LaFleur a lot of fits. I think he can get takedowns. I think he can push this fight into the clinch. I think he can land some big shots on the feet. I mean, this guy was competitive with Johnny Hendricks to a decision, a fight that he arguably could have won. So I think that he can have a very competitive fight here, and if he's able to get that game plan going with the grappling, with the power shots, then I think Mike Pierce can either walk away with a decision or maybe even pick up a TKO. So I'm going to surprisingly side with the underdog here in Mike Pierce. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Joe Lauzon, who is 24-11, taking on Evan Dunham, who is 15-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I've been Dunham minus 180. The comeback on Lauzon plus 140. Right now, looking over 5 dimes, it is minus 200 for Dunham. The comeback on Lauzon is plus 170. So a little bit of action coming in on Dunham early on. Now we're getting some action back on Lauzon. So the action's pretty close at the sports books, and this fight should be pretty close as well. So it kind of fits in basically the right way here. I think what you see in both these guys are really outstanding fighters. I mean, and veterans of the sport, they've been around for a long time. They both faced high-level competition, and they both have potential to finish people on the feet. Even Dunham's really not known for that, his striking aspect for sure. I mean, he's more known of a grinder, of a grappler, and he's capable of finishing people by sub more than anything else. But he does have a little bit of power. And the thing with Lauzon throughout his career, he has been clipped. He has been knocked out before too. So even though Dunham isn't, again, your dynamic striker, you never know. He could clip that jaw of Lauzon's, because I don't trust either one right now as far as chins go. But that being said, you got to give them a little bit of credit. And both of them are tough. I mean, they don't give up. They have that, really, they fight till the end type of mentality, and they really have had success throughout their career. So awesome matchup. Lauzon is a little bit more, I think, capable on the feet though. He does probably have a better chance of, if the fight stays standing the longest, I think that, for a longer amount of time, Lauzon could probably do enough damage that he could make things interesting. But as far as the ground game goes, Lauzon probably is a little bit more sneaky with the sub game as well. But I think defensively, Dunham is a little bit better, and Dunham will probably be in top position because I think Dunham is probably the better wrestler grinder in this spot as well. So a competitive fight across the board. I lean a little bit more towards Dunham. If he doesn't get caught by anything against Lauzon, I think he probably ends up winning on the scorecards in this spot. Both of these guys, it is interesting to see. They both do cut. They both do bleed quite a bit. They've been in so many wars that they have some scar tissue damage for sure. So we could see another, I hope not, but we could see another possible stoppage due to cut along the way as well. So there's all sorts of different ways I could see this fight playing out. But I think the most logical for me is honestly Dunham just controlling the action a little bit more, grinding Lauzon out along the way, and probably pulling off a close competitive decision win if he can not get caught with anything. So that's the way I'm going to go. But this should be really a classic battle, and it's a great matchup.
Lauzon and Dunham are actually very evenly matched. I think on the feet, they both have about the same reach. They both are pretty close in leg reach. They're about the same height. So physically, they're very similar, although Dunham is definitely a little bit better of a wrestler. I think Lauzon packs a little bit more power with his strikes, both standing and if he gets in ground and pound position. And in terms of submissions, I do think that Lauzon is the more dangerous submission threat. He's a little bit more well-rounded with submissions, although Dunham does have some tricky submissions in his own right, as you saw like with his win against Efrain Escudero, people like that. So both of these guys are very competent grapplers. I just feel that Joe Lauzon is a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more of a finisher than Evan Dunham. So if Evan Dunham's going to win this fight, he's probably going to need to grind it out a little bit. I think he needs to push Lauzon into the fence, make it a little uglier, get takedowns while avoiding Lauzon's dangerous guard. And I think that's going to be tricky for 3 straight rounds. Now, Lauzon used to have some issues with his conditioning. He used to slow down in fights, but he's worked on that. You saw some excellent performances from him in his fight against like Mike Chiesa, in his last bout against Takanori Gomi, where he just got a very one-sided smashing against the veteran. And I just think that Joe Lauzon just has a little bit more left in the tank. Now, Dunham is coming off of an impressive win in his own right against Ross Pearson. He was able to grind that out and take away a lot of Pearson's strengths. And I think that was a bit of a surprising upset for a lot of people. But I think Joe Lauzon is a little bit more dangerous in all facets of the game, and I don't think he'll allow Dunham to take away everything, just because Lauzon will be able to threaten wherever this fight goes, whether it's the clinch, whether he's on his back, whether it's on the feet. So I'm favoring Lauzon, but there is always that threat that Dunham can just grind this out a little bit. But I have to side with Joe Lauzon a little bit here. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have Edson Barboza, who is 16-3, taking on Tony Ferguson, who is 20-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Ferguson minus 130, the comeback on Barboza minus 110. Right now, you're looking at the line at 5dimes.eu. It's minus 170 for Ferguson. The comeback on Barboza is plus 160. So more support is coming in on Ferguson. Man, I mean, it's hard to argue really how good Ferguson has looked. The guy is such a complete fighter, such a dangerous fighter, and not just in any particular area. I mean, he can beat you and finish you on the feet with his striking. He's got power. He's got precision with his striking accuracy, and he throws a lot of combinations to get the attack flowing properly. So he does a lot of good things. His distance, his reach. There's a lot of things to like about his striking game, but on the ground, he might be even better. I mean, he's got a good wrestling background. He's got decent takedown defense for the most part. And then he obviously has sneaky good subs. So he does have advantages over Barboza. I can understand why some of the people are coming in that way, especially considering that Barboza, he's been on the feet. He's been rocked at times. He's been obviously knocked out before. He's been choked out before because he got rocked by Cerrone as well. So that's the problem with Barboza, and trusting him 100% is against guys that can really bring it on the feet, that have a ton of power, that can sit there and strike with him. He sometimes doesn't have as much success as you'd like to see. But one aspect of his game that I do love is his takedown defense is on point. If you do try to take him down, even for a split second, he gets back up to his feet really quick. And then on the feet, he is better than most in the lightweight division. He's a technical striker. His offense is a thing of beauty to watch. Just everything about his striking game. Nasty leg kicks. Talk about precision striking. He's got that as well. He's got power to go along with it. Smart fight IQ. He's just really a great on another level type of fighter on the feet. So Ferguson, defensively, he's shown some signs of getting tagged a little bit too much, and this is a dangerous spot for him if he is going to play the stand-up game with Barboza, and he's going to have to. That's the scary thing here, because Ferguson, even though he has outstanding wrestling and he's able to grapple most, against Barboza, he's not going to have a lot of success. Even if he gets, again, a brief takedown, I think Barboza's going to end up bouncing back to his feet. So if this fight plays on the feet, if Barboza's chin holds up, he's going to win this fight. So I'm actually leaning a little bit more towards Barboza, and I've been backing Ferguson now for a little while. He's won me some cash. He's looked good doing so along the way. I mean, he's gained a lot of people's respect out there. So I'm all aboard Ferguson, but at the same time, matchups are everything. So in this spot, and with all the action honestly coming in a little bit more towards Ferguson here, I actually think Barboza, this is a great spot for him to get some of that respect back. Slowly, he's been getting that. I mean, I'm talking about him getting clipped against outstanding strikers, and it might be a little unfair to say because he did make it to a decision, to a very competitive decision against Michael Johnson, and Michael Johnson is one of the hardest hitters in the weight class. And then his last fight against Paul Felder, which he actually won, Felder hits really hard as well. So it's not like everybody's going out there and knocking him out. I understand that. It's just, that's the scary part about Barboza, that, you know, from time to time he gets clipped and he does get wobbled and he gets dropped. So that's the only thing you got to be cautious about here, because other than that, he does have an edge on the feet here against Ferguson. I think defensively he is more sound, even though he does get tagged and wobbled. Ferguson, obviously against Trujillo, for example, man, that was scary early on because Trujillo is a beast. He brought it to Ferguson, almost got him out of there, almost knocked him out, but credit Ferguson for his toughness. I mean, he's the type of guy that even if you do rock him, he recovers quickly and he's able to still take over the fight and control the fight and then probably finish his opponent. So his cardio is good. He can keep up a high, very high pace as well. So there's a lot of good things to like about Ferguson, and there's a lot of good things to like about this fight. An awesome matchup. I'm glad the UFC kind of put this together because really the winner of this fight gets himself at another level and really in the mix of a true title shot along the way as well. So I'm going to lean a little bit against the grain here, and I'm going to go with Barboza to pull off the victory. I think he will be able to keep it standing, and he is the better striker, even though Ferguson's going to be dangerous. So my pick is going to be Barboza.
Tony Ferguson definitely hits incredibly hard, but one of his big advantages on the feet that allows him to do that and makes up for his technical deficiencies standing is the fact that he has a huge reach advantage over most fighters. I mean, he has a 76-inch reach in the lightweight division. That is monstrous. But the problem here is Edson Barboza has a 75-inch reach, and he actually knows how to use it. So what you're going to see in this fight, at least on the feet, is Tony Ferguson winging some more looping strikes, and Barboza should be able to avoid those. And I see Barboza firing back with crisp jabs, good straight punches, and then those devastating leg kicks of his. Now, where Ferguson will have an advantage in this fight is he is a solid wrestler, but even more than that, he is a very competent grappler. He has a good, dangerous guard. He goes for a lot of unorthodox submissions with arm bars and rolling heel hooks and all kinds of silly things. He has some crazy escapes from opponents going for takedowns against him, like you saw in his Josh Ferguson fight. So Ferguson will be dangerous at all times in this fight, and he is the more well-rounded of the two between him and Barboza. But Barboza is so good on the feet that I expect him to really piece up Ferguson here a little bit. I think Ferguson will be explosive. He can throw kicks and knees and all kinds of things and spinning attacks. I mean, I really think he could hurt Barboza with the spinning attack if Barboza does not see it coming because between the two of these guys, Barboza's chin is definitely worse. He's been dropped. He's been hurt in fights a lot more often than Ferguson has. But Ferguson is significantly more hittable. So it's a very interesting dynamic. You have two extremely talented guys in the lightweight division, and it really could go either way depending on who is getting things going with their skill set. If Ferguson's able to get this fight to the clinch, if he's able to get this fight on the ground, he's going to have a dangerous submission threat. He's going to be dangerous with ground and pound. And he could land one of those Hail Mary type of strikes because he does pack that power. But if Barboza is able to keep this in distance, if he's able to use his technical advantages on the feet, then I really see him lighting Ferguson up. And while I don't know for sure if he can knock Ferguson out, we have seen Ferguson hurt a little bit in fights like against Abel Trujillo. Barboza might just play this safe and try to outpoint Ferguson and win a decision. So very interesting dynamic in this fight, but I'm going to agree with Nick. I think it's Edson Barboza's fight to lose as long as he's able to keep his distance on the feet and work a technical striking battle. So I'm going to pick Edson Barboza. Now moving on to the main event of the evening in the featherweight division, we have Frankie Edgar, who is 18-4-1, taking on Chad Mendes, who is 17-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Edgar, minus 150 to come back on Mendes, plus 120. And right now, looking over the line, it's minus 125 reduced use right now at 5 dimes for Edgar, and Mendes is plus 115. So 5-cent move on the dog, but a little drop on the favorite for sure with the line margin tightening to reduced. So this is an awesome fight. I mean, this is a super fight type of feel to it, really, because you have two of the best in the weight class for sure, 145, two of the best pound for pound fighters on the planet as well. And two guys that are capable of finishing and winning fights in all sorts of different ways. I mean, obviously the scorecards, they're typically the type of guy that can outpoint their opponents, grind them out in wrestling if they want to, get some takedowns, do some damage on the floor, but they don't have to do that though. I mean, both these guys are also capable of finishing fights on the feet and outpointing their opponents that way as well. What separates them a little bit is I think Mendes has a little bit more knockout power, pure knockout power than Edgar. Now, can't sleep on Edgar's knockout power either. He is more than capable of finishing fights, especially as the fight goes. I think Mendes if any disadvantage in this fight for Mendes, it's probably his gas tank over Edgar. Edgar could go 5 rounds strong. You know, he's going to be able to keep a persistent pace. And from time to time, I know it might be a little unfair to say about Mendes, but he does tend to fade and slow down in spots. I mean, in his last fight with Conor McGregor, you can kind of forgive him for that because he took the fight on short notice. But outside of that, I'm talking about, you have noticed in the past, I mean, Nick Lentz sticks out to me. I know a lot, again, there's always something behind the story that there's a reason for them to look a little bit off for a night. So you got to give them credit, but at the same time, you don't ever question Edgar's cardio or conditioning at all. And I kind of do in the back of my mind with Mendes from time to time. So I think that's one of Mendes's flaws there. I think Edgar is probably just the better, slightly ahead in almost every aspect of the game, minus the power factor, because Mendes, man, he packs so much power. I'm still amazed that Conor McGregor honestly was able to take some of those shots from Mendes, but different story, different fights. In this fight, it should be a classic battle. I mean, we're going to see competitive rounds, round after round. If these guys don't end up landing and finishing each other, it could be a type of split decision fight. That's how good and how amazing this fight is. So I have to lean a little bit more towards Edgar. I think that I do trust him just a little bit more. The only problem, though, for me on that regard is that Edgar is 33 and beyond that in fight years. I mean, he's had some wars. Obviously, the fights with Maynard from the way back when, kind of come into my mind, and he was clipped, rocked, almost knocked out in a couple of those fights. So that did some damage. And then he's fought the best of the best in his career. I mean, at lightweight, he defended, you know, his title, obviously, and he had some wars with Ben Henderson. He had just across the board, he's faced top-notch competition, but he's taken damage along the way as well. So I'm expecting eventual decline spot to hit for Edgar. It might not happen here, and it might not be anytime soon, but that is in the back of my mind as well. That's why I'm even bringing that up. So we could see the start of this fight. I hope we don't, because I want to see this fight just be everything that I'm hoping it is, and that's just a competitive back and forth type of battle, something that keeps us all highly entertained because we're watching high quality, truly great fighters in the sport of MMA right now at the top of their game, and that's what we're probably going to see here. So I lean a little bit more towards Edgar in this spot. I think he probably can win the decision, but man, what a fight. Either way, I mean, this is the type of fight you sit back and watch and just truly enjoy. So hopefully it plays out that way.
Yeah, Frankie Edgar, Chad Mendes, they are the next best 2 featherweights on the entire roster other than the 2 competing in the main event of UFC 194 the next day. And both of these guys are very physically similar. They're both the same height, and they both have the same leg reach. And believe it or not, this is one of the first fights in Frankie Edgar's career where he's actually going to have a reach advantage over somebody. He's got about 2 inches. But Chad Mendes is going to make up for that with his athleticism and his power. Because if Mendes is able to step inside with a big hook, he could put Frankie Edgar's lights out. We've seen Edgar hurt multiple times in his career, but he does always manage to bounce back. The guy has the heart of a champion. And since dropping down to the featherweight division, Edgar has looked ferocious. I mean, he's been in there against really tough guys, including the champ Aldo, and had a very competitive fight with Aldo. And I think what's really helped him is the fact that he's finally fighting people about his own size. And he's able to use some of those advantages of the wrestling that was able to allow him to get takedowns against elite lightweights. It's allowing him to dominate some people in the featherweight division. I mean, you saw against BJ Penn, I mean, that was a slaughter, but he repeatedly took Penn down and just pummeled him on the ground until he got the TKO. Believe it or not, he might be able to be one of the first people to take down Chad Mendes. I believe he's stuffed every takedown attempt so far in his career, although most people aren't trying to take down Mendes. But if anybody could in the UFC featherweight division, I think it can be Frankie Edgar. In open space, Edgar is one of the best footwork and pure movement guys in the division. He is constantly on the attack from the outside, looking for opportunities to step in, get off a combination, and then step out without getting hit back. He's spectacular at that. He's great with his exit patterns. He mixes things up so that it's unpredictable. And really, he has done a terrific job in his mixed martial arts career with the tools that he has, because Edgar isn't the hardest hitter. He's not the best finisher, but he just goes out there and he takes care of business. Now, Mendes, on the other hand, I mean, this is a guy that a lot of people thought could have been the champion, and he's just had a lot of trouble against the tip top of the featherweight guys in terms of the 2 losses to Aldo, and then most recently the loss to McGregor on short notice. Now that McGregor fight, I mean, he was looking good. He was getting takedowns. He opened up a cut on McGregor the first time I think McGregor's bled in the UFC. He was landing some huge bombs on McGregor, but just couldn't hurt him. So that was a bit surprising. But that always will be the threat with Mendes, is he's got that elite wrestling, which I don't think will be a huge factor here because Frankie Edgar is so good with his own wrestling. I think that's going to neutralize one of Mendes' biggest strengths. And then Mendes is a huge power hitter. I mean, that's something that's really developed over the last couple years. But really, the way I see this fight playing out is Mendes is going to have a puncher's chance because this is a 5-round fight. I don't think Mendes is going to be able to keep up Edgar's pace for 5 straight rounds. He was able to go 5 with Aldo, but Aldo is a little bit more deliberate. I think Edgar's going to make him work a little bit more, and I think he can really wear Mendes down. So really, Mendes is going to have about 2 or 3 rounds to try to knock Edgar out, and if he doesn't do it, I see Edgar winning a decision or maybe even picking up a late TKO. And I really feel like Frankie Edgar is fighting as good right now as he's ever fought in his entire career, and I expect Frankie Edgar to walk away with a decision victory, so Edgar will be my pick. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for the Ultimate Fighter 22 finale. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out this Friday following the UFC 194 weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker premium member. Also, if you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsbreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of our homepage for either Nick's or Mike James's premium bets. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes Sportsbook. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.